Here's a little bit about me and my professional background. I'm going to move through this super quickly because I will tell you guys more about my story in a little bit, but you can always reach out to me on Instagram at the Finance Twins. I love connecting and hearing from you guys. So please do reach out to me and let me know what you thought, or if you have any questions. Just love hearing from you guys. And let's start with, have you started investing for retirement? Yes or no? And, when we talk about saving for retirement, this can include a workplace retirement account like a 401k, an IRA that you set up on your own, or just a brokerage account, or just money that you've set aside that you don't really plan to touch. And so the reality is that 68% of adults under 30 years old don't own stocks. This probably won't surprise a lot of you. We know that student loans are so high. So by the time you're 30, most people are still paying off these student loans and repaying all these things. So obviously it's really hard to get started. But you might be thinking, well, surely as people age, maybe start approaching their 50s, a lot more people have to be owning stocks and investing for the future, right? Well, not really. The majority of adults under 50 still don't own stocks. When I think about it, it makes a ton of sense, just because obviously the things are getting more and more expensive. Wages aren't really increasing, but also a lot of, the people around our age, they grew up seeing the financial collapse in 2008. They're probably very, very wary of the financial system, which is backed by data. And so even if they do have money, they just might not be investing. They might be sitting on it in a bank account. And so pretty dire stats. And, the reason this is so important is because buying stocks has historically been the most effective way to invest for your future. And so if you're not investing and, putting your money in the stock market, you can really be falling behind. If you look over the past 100 years, the average return of stocks has been around 10%. And over any given 20-year period, they haven't really lost any money. So stocks are just really, really powerful. And obviously, you can't guarantee performance. Who knows how stocks are going to perform over the next 100 years, but most financial experts just agree that stocks are still going to be the most effective way for the vast majority of people to invest for their future. The next question is, do you know how much money you'll need for retirement? Or even if it's just a rough estimate? Then the reality is that only 44% of adults know how much they'll need to retire. And to be honest with all of you guys here today, when I saw this stat, I was shocked that it was so high. 44% is almost half the people, but half the people I talk to, they don't know this. And my job is literally to talk and write and read about money. And it's really so rare when I do talk to someone who says, yeah, this is my number and this is what I'm doing to get there. But it is really important to know. Here's a few rules of thumb that you guys can aim for retirement savings milestones. Do not freak out when you see these. I know it can be nerve-wracking, but these are kind of aspirational targets and they're really rough and they don't necessarily apply to everyone. Everyone has a unique situation, but really this should give you kind of like a rough sense of what Fidelity has said. It will set most people up in a good place. So by the time you're 30 years old, if you can save 1 times your annual salary, that's great. When you're 45, that jumps up to 4 times your salary, and then all the way up to 10 times when you're 67. So again, don't freak out if you're worried and you don't even know where to get started, because that is why we are here. And today I will show you so that one day you'll look at this chart and say, I've got this. So what we're going to cover today is why investing is one of the most important things that you can do right now. And I mean literally right now, like today, before 2020 ends. 2020 has been a pretty sucky year for a lot of people, but this can be one way to really start 2021 on the right foot. The next thing is that we're going to learn how we can leverage the power of compound interest so that we can really make our money work a lot harder for us. The third point is that we're going to learn the number one easiest way to invest in the stock market effectively. A lot of people are intimidated by putting their money in the market, and you'll see by the end of today that it's really not as difficult as you think it is, and you'll feel a lot better once you are invested. And finally, I'll show you how to earn your fair share of stock market returns. So what is our overall goal today? It's really simple. is just to make sure that you understand why it's so important that you start investing as soon as possible, and to give you the concrete steps to follow so you can get started immediately. So I know that's everyone's probably excited about this because that's why we're all here. So I just want to jump in and talk about some myths about investing. And these are probably some things that have held a lot of you back from starting to invest. The first myth is that investing is too complicated. And I totally get it. I felt the same way. This part of my presentation makes me kind of emotional, and I kind of glossed over my story at the beginning because I wanted to share more of it here. But when I was 7 years old, I lost my dad to brain cancer. He kind of died unexpectedly. And as a result, we grew up poor. My mom, she always worked multiple jobs to try to provide for my brothers and me. But my father had always handled everything financial in our household. He is a primary breadwinner. And after he passed away, we really, really struggled financially. And I wasn't able to learn any of these financial skills at home because my mom didn't know them and she couldn't pass them down to us. And so she'd never invested. So how was she supposed to teach me how to invest if she had never learned herself? And so this all just goes to say that I basically grew up thinking that you needed like a PhD in physics in order to invest. And it seemed really confusing. And once I actually started studying finance in undergrad and then in grad school when I got my MBA, and I realized how simple investing could be, I actually was super skeptical. And I said, there's no way this is this simple. I grew up thinking that, it's something that very few people could actually do. And it's just a myth. The second myth is that investing is way too risky. And the reality is that, anytime you invest in anything, it is risky. You can lose your money, but investing doesn't have to be risky. There are ways to invest in a way that is a lot safer than you realize. And not investing at all carries its own risk, right? So for me, the reality is that 25% of adults age 65 plus are entering the workforce. And the seniors in this category, it's the fastest growing part of the workforce here in the US. And working until the day that I die, that seems really risky too. And that's not something that I want for my future. And it's probably not something that you want for yours or your loved ones. And so while investing can and is risky, it's also extremely risky to not invest and to not do anything to prepare for the future. The third myth is that you have to be rich to invest. But the reality is that it is easier now than ever to invest. There's so many apps, so many ways to invest. There's literally today in 2020, it's the easiest time in the history of let's say like modern humanity to put your money into the stock market. And you can start with as little as $1. So you do not need to be rich whatsoever. Growing up with literally nothing, I always thought that investing was only something that rich people could do. But now I just realized that it's something that helps people become rich. And it's not something you do once you become rich. You literally build wealth by investing. And finally, the fourth myth is that I don't actually need to invest if I save a lot of my money, right? And the reality is that you still do need to invest, even if you're incredibly good at saving, because inflation will eat your savings. A lot of people are afraid to invest. And so they convince themselves that they don't really have to do it, but they're making things harder for themselves because inflation is basically the cost of everything that you purchase increasing over time. And if you just leave your money in a checking or savings account and it's barely making any money or earning any interest, then you're literally losing purchasing power over time. And it's like setting some of your money on fire because in 30, 50, 40 years, you will literally not be able to buy as many things if you're not investing. And when you put money in the stock market, it's a great hedge against inflation because as you're earning and your money grows, then your purchasing power is not diminishing. And in an ideal world, your money will actually be becoming more valuable. So I know that a lot of you are here because you understand that it's harder than ever to save money, right? So 30 years ago, the costs, when you look at the costs of college, for example, or the cost of healthcare, and you compare it to today, it's insane. So over the past 30 years, the cost of a college education has increased 8 times faster than wages have. And so because of this, during that time, since wages have stayed flat, our generations after us, we need to start investing as soon as possible so that we have the best chance for a secure future. And the reality is that, at least here in the United States where I live, Social Security won't be enough for us. The average Social Security benefit is roughly $1,500 per month, which comes out to $18,000 annually. As you can imagine, $18,000 barely puts you above the poverty line for a single person. And when you compare that to the fact that the average spend for those that are 65 plus is $4,200 per month, or nearly $51,000 per year, there's kind of a huge problem there, right? There's this discrepancy. So when we see that Social Security can get you $1,500, the average person is actually trying to spend $4,200 a month. There's this huge deficit, and that is why we're here. We need to figure out a way to bridge that gap. So scary, and but at the same time, it should feel, perhaps, I don't know if the right word is liberating or empowering, because the onus is on us. Like, we can do this. We have the tools, and you're literally, as we speak, you're acquiring the knowledge to try to change that pattern. Here we see that the average person who lives to 95 and has a 30-year retirement, during those 30 years of retirement, they will spend about $1.3 million in total during that time. They'll receive about $500,000 in Social Security during that time. So there's this gap of $800,000 that they'll need in additional funds. So a lot of you are probably thinking, like, okay, so $800,000 that I might need to bridge that gap, like, where's that coming from? And, I encourage everyone listening here today, including you, Aaron, tonight, as you're standing in the bathroom and you're brushing those pearly whites, take a good hard look in the mirror, because that's the person who's going to have to be responsible for this. The good news is that time is your friend, right? Most people that are watching this, if you're on YouTube or you're here on Teachable, you're probably not 80 years old or 90. So time is your friend. If you have time, you can do something to try to bridge that gap and do the best that you can, but you really do need to start as soon as you can. I'd want to say that if you get nothing else from listening to me today, it's that today's the most important day for you to start, right? The best day would have been yesterday. The next best day is today. So time is your friend, but you really need to start immediately. I know that the thought of having to accumulate hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars on top of just living life and trying to scrape by and make ends meet and potentially buy a home and do these things is super scary. But I just want to remind everyone here that you're not alone. Literally every person in our modern society either has to be thinking about these things, or they worry about these things, or if they're not thinking about them and worrying about them, they really should be, because there's no way to escape it unless you have some sort of plan for someone else to take care of you. We all are kind of like in this together, which, at least for me, it makes me feel better to know that, I'm not trying to experience something unique that other people are not. I remember when I first graduated from undergrad and I was working on Wall Street, I didn't really start saving for retirement. I wasn't investing. And looking back, I think I was just afraid and scared because I didn't want to lose the money, because I had this kind of like impoverished background, and I just wanted to hold on to every dollar I made. And the thought process I had was literally, I'm young now. If I know I need like $1 million or whatever it is for retirement, my plan is to be extremely successful. And so when I'm in my 40s and 50s and making all this money, I can just, save for a few years, and there it is. It's problem solved. We worry about the things that are right in front of us now. And so let's go through an example, just to kind of like really drive home this point of why it's so important to start today. So with this example, we're going to assume that the starting age is 40 years old and that the person's going to retire when they're 65. So there's a 25-year period here. They're investing $10,000 annually for a total of $250,000. So if the assumption is that they're earning 8% interest, or 8% is their average investment gain over this 25-year period. And so at 65, they have nearly $800,000 saved up, which is pretty sweet. Now let's look and see what would happen if they would have started 5 years earlier. Again, we're keeping everything else the same. They're only investing $10,000 annually for 25 years, and they're only for a total of $250,000. So literally from the ages of 60 to 65, they're not putting another penny in because they already put in the $250,000. But by starting earlier, the difference here is really incredible. They will end up with 47% more money just by starting 5 years earlier. They both earned the same investment return every single year, but just those 5 extra years of compounding and letting their money grow gave them 47% more. By starting by 10 years earlier, over twice as much money, 116% more money. And again, they only invested $250,000 total. And then the final 10 years, they didn't even put a penny in. They just didn't even touch it. It just, no extra money was being saved. They were using those $10,000 to travel to Hawaii or to, do whatever they wanted. And they still ended up with over twice as much money. Yeah, compound interest is the truth. And so this is another example of that. So a dollar invested earlier will be worth more later. So here in the first example, they put in $250,000 and ended with $789,000, which means that every dollar that they invested on average grew to be $3.16, which is pretty sweet. You put in one, you take out three. That seems like a pretty good deal. But if they would have started 5 years earlier, because of compound interest, they would have had each dollar turn into $4.64. And again, 10 years earlier, $6.82. So this really is the power of compound interest. This phenomenon explains why a dollar invested sooner is worth more later. And the longer your money is invested, the more time it has to grow. And so you're essentially, the way compound interest works is you invest money and it grows because you're earning profits on it. But then as your balance gets bigger and you earn another 8% or whatever percent, you're earning off a bigger base. So it snowballs and grows and it compounds, and it feels kind of like magic because it's so powerful. And here in this specific example that we showed, if you started at 40 years old, the first 5 years of investment returns only accounted for 2% of the total profits that you made. Meanwhile, the last year alone, between 64 and 65, that final year accounted for 11% of the total returns. So if you would have delayed that retirement for 1 year, for example, started investing even 1 year earlier, that would have been another year of like 11 or 12 or whatever percent contribution. Each additional year is just really so powerful. So by investing earlier, you give your money decades down the road the chance to compound and work really, really hard for you. If you haven't started investing yet, you're probably wondering exactly how to get started. So let's talk about that and see what are the things that you really need to begin your investing journey. That's really why we're actually here today. And I love to think and use the metaphor of your investing journey as being kind of like a long road trip. So, what is the first thing that you need to start your trip? You need a car. Here we have this beautiful red car, and the car represents your investment account. And the vehicle you'll use to invest your money is this investment account. And two common investment accounts for retirement are the 401k and IRAs. Both of these accounts were created for retirement investing, and they offer tax incentives so that Americans are encouraged to invest more for retirement versus just keeping it in your checking account or investing in a non-retirement account, because you'll end up paying more money in taxes, and no one likes to pay money in taxes. And so the government said, we're going to give tax breaks for these two types of accounts to really encourage people. So we're going to really focus on those today because I want you guys to keep as much of your money as possible. The easiest way for you to start to save for retirement is through a 401k plan at work. If you work for a nonprofit like a university or a hospital or a foundation, it might be known as a 403b. If you work for the federal government, you might have a 457 account. They all basically work the exact same way. It's more just kind of like a nomenclature thing. But the beautiful thing about these accounts is that you might already have one. Some companies do make them opt out. So when you start the job there, or they, let's say, release the plan, if they automatically enroll everyone, so you might already have one. Some companies do not. You have to opt into it, but it's worth checking out and see if you already have one. And so let's talk about the way that these work, so you just have a little bit more detail about that. First thing to know is that they do have annual contribution limits. 401ks have limits of $19,500 for 2020 and 2021. So if you're a high-powered lawyer in Manhattan and making hundreds of thousands of dollars, you're still capped at the same amount. The majority of people, putting away $19,000, almost $20,000 in a 401k, that's a lot of money that comes up from your paycheck. So don't worry if you can't max this out. Most people don't, but it's good to know that there are limits here. We talked about this earlier, but they do have contribution limits. The nice thing about these is that when you make these contributions, they are tax deductible, so they will lower your taxable income. So if you can put in $10,000, your income on your 1040 or whatever tax form you file will be reduced by that. So then you pay fewer taxes. And if you are able to take that money that you didn't pay in taxes and invest it, you can even, grow your wealth and prepare for retirement even more quickly. This is one of my favorite points. I think the importance of the fact that for these workplace accounts, you can make direct payroll contributions is highly underrated and overlooked. The research shows that when people use direct payroll contributions to save for anything, really, they're much more able to do it, and they end up investing way more money than if they had plans to do it on their own. And the Richard Thaler, professor at the University of Chicago, literally won the Nobel Prize in economics for showing the behavioral impact of direct payroll contributions. So this cannot be overlooked. A lot of people, myself included, when I started my career, said, I don't trust these guys. I'm going to invest it on my own. And then guess what happens? The money hits your bank account, and then you end up going out with friends, or just life gets in the way. But if that money never hits your checking account because it goes directly to your investments, you will be able to invest way more than you ever thought was possible. This one, a lot more people are familiar with, which is the fact that you can get a potential employer matching contribution, which means you can put in some money into this account, and your employer, if they decide to do so, it's optional. Not all employers do this, but they can match a certain percent of what you put in. So they might say, we're going to match 50% of the first 6% of your pay that goes into this account, for example. And that's a way to get free money. I never really like calling it free money because you work super hard to get these benefits at your job. You give your blood, sweat, and tears to your job. And so this is a benefit that you're entitled to if they offer it. So make sure you take advantage of that. These accounts do have required distributions at retirement. I don't think it's necessarily a big deal, but once you hit a certain age, they do require you to withdraw a certain amount, but you'll likely need it to live. So not a big of a deal. And we already talked about this, but these plans are not offered by all companies. So if your job does not offer a retirement plan, it's not ideal, but that's okay. And I don't have the specific stats, but I would say maybe 50% of my personal friends don't have one at work, which means that they need to invest on their own. And that brings us to the IRA. So an IRA is very similar, but there are some important differences between these accounts and a 401k. So let's chat about those now. The first one is that they have annual contribution limits of $6,000 for 2020 and 2021. So they are lower than for the 401k. Second thing is that standard contributions can be tax deductible. Here I say can be tax deductible because there are some income limits that the IRS imposes. For most people, it's not an issue, but if you do think that you have a higher income, it's worth looking in to make sure that you'd qualify for a tax deduction for these. The next thing is that Roth contributions to IRAs are withdrawn tax-free. So there's Roth IRAs and traditional IRAs. They're very similar except for the tax implications, where one is taxed up front and one is taxed later. Tax contributions are taxed up front, so they will not lower your taxable income. But on the flip side, your earnings will grow tax-free, and that money can be withdrawn tax-free at retirement. So when deciding which one to choose between, it often comes down to what you expect your current and future tax rate to be. For a lot of people, that makes their head hurt. So just pick one and don't look back, because investing in the wrong type of IRA is a million times better than not having an IRA at all. There's no matching contribution here. These are accounts that you set up on your own. You don't do this through your employer. So there's no matching opportunity there. And then finally, there are potential required distributions at retirement, but not necessarily. Again, there's nuances there, so you just have to read about them. So you're probably thinking, okay, so I know that I should be looking at a 401k or an IRA, but so how do I go about opening these guys? So if we look at the left, for an employer-sponsored account like a 401k, these are some common companies that your employer might use for these. But again, you will not be responsible for opening these, and you really don't have a choice. Your job will be the one, your employer will be the one that picks this servicer for the 401k. And so you don't really need to worry about that. The general advice people often say like, okay, well, 401k and IRA, like which one should I fund first or whatever. The general advice is really to fund the workplace plan until you get the full company match, and then see if the investment options are attractive. If they're not attractive, or if your 401k charges too many administrative fees or other fees, then you can go for the IRA. And if you max out the IRA, go back to the 401k. That's for people who are trying to like be really, really mindful with every single penny that they're investing. But for most people, just max out the 401k if you have one. Contributions are higher. You can do it directly through your payroll. But again, it depends. On the right side of the screen, IRAs, you do have to pay attention to, because you do have a choice. You have a ton of choice. These are just 8 of very many different options that you have. I always put Fidelity and Vanguard first because they're the ones that I've used before and love, and I'm not affiliated with either of them. So I'm just recommending them to you guys because I do think they're great, and I think you'd be happy with them. And yeah, one question, oftentimes people see this slide, they'll say, well, what about Robinhood? I have a Robinhood account. Why isn't Robinhood here? Robinhood right now does not offer the abilities to open an IRA or a retirement account. They just have normal taxable brokerage accounts. But if you don't want the tax benefits, then yeah, go with Robinhood for your investments. So now let's look at how you actually open a Fidelity IRA step by step for you guys. So first step, go to Google, just type in Open Fidelity IRA. You can put in any company if you want. This example just was Fidelity. You can click the first link there, open and fund a Fidelity IRA. It'll take you to this page, and you can select between a traditional or Roth IRA. Read a little bit about each one and figure out which one's right for you. Like I said, either one is better than neither one. And so don't spend 10 years focused on this. After you do that, you'll choose which one you want, type in some personal info, and then it'll take you here. You'll put in your name, social security, your address. You always have to put in social security when you open up any sort of investment account, because there are tax implications, and social security numbers are the way that taxes are handled in this country. So that's why they're asking for that. I know some people are wary of giving their such personal info, but it's not a Fidelity thing. Anytime you open any investment account, you will need to provide social security. All right, so we have our car. Our car is our investment vehicle, which is the account that you guys just saw how to open. But what do we need next? A car by itself really can't do anything, right? You have to put gas in it, and gas are your contributions. So let's fill this baby up. So again, coming back to Fidelity, super easy. Once you have your account open, you go into deposit fund or move money screen, and you choose which bank account you want to transfer money to. In this example, I'm showing you the Roth IRA. So you choose your specific account, and then at the very bottom, you put in the date you want to transfer and the amount. And here it says the 2020 contribution limit, $6,000. You've contributed 0 to date, so you can put up to $6,000 in this account. Phenomenal. So now we've got the car and we have gasoline. But the reality is that without the driver, the car's not going to go anywhere. And the driver are your investments. So a lot of people think that an IRA or a 401k itself is an investment, but these accounts are just accounts that you can use to buy your investments. So you can think of a 401k or an IRA as like a savings or a checking account, and that it just holds money. It's a place that stores money. You need to invest the money for it to do something. So I've heard horror stories from a lot of people who reach out to me on Instagram saying, I opened my IRA 10 years ago and I logged in and my money hasn't grown. Like, am I being scammed? And it's really painful to have to explain, like, no, the money just wasn't invested. It was just sitting there collecting dust. And so make sure that you don't forget this step because it's so important. And so investing. Figuring out what to invest in can be super terrifying, right? What if you pick wrong? These feelings are just very scary, and they arise because it can seem so risky to invest. And, we already talked about how investing can seem really scary. In the news, you really only hear about the stock market investing when there's a crash. But as we talked about earlier, it's also really risky to not invest whatsoever. And while investing can be risky, as it says on the screen here, investing just really comes down to the trade-off between risk and reward. And the easiest way to start investing and to know that you aren't taking too much risk is to buy a target date fund. So target date fund is a term that a lot of you haven't heard before, but don't be overwhelmed. They're super easy to understand. So a target date fund are just single investments that automatically become less risky as you approach your retirement age. So a lot of people, when they think of investing in the stock market, they say, I want to buy Tesla, I want to buy Apple, etc. And they think like that's what investing is, but really it's even much more effective to buy a target date fund. And these funds typically contain a collection of different investments that are split between stocks and bonds. I'm moving through this kind of quickly, but stocks are typically more risky than bonds. And so these target date funds automatically shift your portfolio away from stocks and more into bonds as you approach retirement age to make it more conservative as you age, which is typically a best practice because you don't want the 70-year-old who needs that money to survive for a few more years to lose their money in the stock market and then be, not have enough time to either go back to work and recoup some of that money. The beautiful thing about target date funds is that it's only one investment. So it's really, really easy to manage. And like I said, generally have relatively low fees and they're very effective. This is the Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett. Maybe the sweatshirt gave it away. I thought it was funny that he was playing baseball. And so the reason we have Warren Buffett here is because 10 years ago, in 2007, he bet a hedge fund manager $1 million that an S&P index fund would outperform a group of hedge funds over a 10-year period, and he spanked them. It wasn't even close. The index fund way outperformed them. And the reason that I'm talking about index funds now is because target date funds are comprised of index funds. And so you just buy one target date fund and it has index funds, which are collections of tons of different stocks. So if you really want to buy Apple and Tesla and Amazon stock and those things, a target date fund will include those stocks because it includes the bundles of the index funds. And a common index fund is the S&P 500, which will include 500 of the biggest companies in the country. So how do we find and buy these target date funds? So again, sticking to this example with Fidelity, you'll literally go back to Google, type in Fidelity target date funds. Here I can see that their Fidelity brands theirs as Freedom Funds, and you basically will need to find a target date fund, whether it's at Fidelity or whichever company you use, that will have the year closest to your target retirement the year in which you will want to retire in the title. So here we see, for example, if I wanted to retire in the year 2050, they have the Fidelity Freedom Index 2050 fund. They're usually in 5 or 10 year increments. So let's say if I wanted to retire in 2047, I would still look at this fund, or 2053, I might still look at this fund. And you would select this fund, and then you see at the top right-hand corner, there's a little buy button. And so you click that. You go to this trading screen where you choose the account you want to trade from. In this case, it's the Roth IRA. You choose the fund that you want to purchase, which was the Fidelity Freedom Index 2050 fund, which has a ticker of FIPFX. Tickers are just the identifiers for the different investments you can make in the stock market. And then at the very bottom, you choose how much you want to put into them. The nice thing about these Fidelity funds is that they don't have an investment minimum. So you can literally start with $10. You can start with $1. You can start with whatever you want. For a Roth IRA, for example, we're capped at $6,000 for the year, but you put it in and then you place the order and voila. Just talking about those minimums, just wanted to share Vanguard's also super popular. So I want to show you equivalent fund at Vanguard, VFIFX, which is their Target Retirement 2050 fund. They do have minimums here that you can see. IRAs $1,000, custodial accounts $1,000 in general, investments accounts $1,000. So just one thing to understand, that not all target retirement or target date funds have no minimums. So let's recap really quickly. So this is kind of like the most important thing, right? So the sooner you can start investing, the harder your money will work for you. Make sure that you enroll in your workplace retirement plan and or open an IRA. Obviously, the more the better. Make sure that you fund your account on a regular basis. Investing isn't just one thing you do once and then go to sleep and never think about it again. Try to do it every month. Try to incorporate it into your regular budgeting or your regular spending every month so that you can really chip away at your retirement goals. And step 4, buy the target date fund that best aligns with your goals and time horizon. For most people, that'll just be the target date fund with the year that's the closest to the year in which they would like to retire. And again, just want to reiterate that you have to reinvest. It's not just a one-time thing. And this isn't about, oh, I should have started when I was 30, or I'm 50 now, I should have started when I was 40. No, life is short. Let's not dwell on the past. The fact is, just start today. If you're 50, starting today when you're 50 is better than if you start when you're 55. Right? So don't beat yourself up. We're not here to beat ourselves up. We're here to make a plan and to build a better future for ourselves.